So we are nearing the end of the day, and we are very excited for what we achieved, and we are looking forward for tomorrow to finalize everything that we want to finalize in order to launch the movement. My name is Eran Shaishon. I'm the CEO of the Breakout Group, and we are the proud partners of the JCC in Palo Alto, the Oshman family JCC. And towards this next panel, first I'd like to ask you to put your phones on mute and include, not the Israeli speakers, I'll omit you. There will be a time for Q&A, so please be respectful and don't make statements, only questions. And following this session, we're gonna have a special plenary, incredible panel, and also Hanukkah and menorah lighting, and also songs from the Maccabites. Maccabites, who are, I understand, are very big here, right? Okay. So I'd like to introduce the next session, Opening Access to Jewish Life in Israel, Conversation on Jewish Expression in Israel. If Israel is the nation state of the entire Jewish people, then Israel's Jewish life should definitely express the foundational reality. However, key streams of Judaism are not present in Israeli society. Primarily missing is the role of rabbis as community leaders that integrate Judaism into the fabric of Israeli society. This session will explore the integration of Jewish life into the Israeli society. So our distinguished speakers today are Daniel Posen, the CEO of the Posen Foundation. Raise your hand. Stand on the chair. Dr. Tomer Persico is the inaugural Shalom Hartman Scholar in Residence in the Bay Area in conjunction with the academic position as Koret Visiting Assistant Professor of Jewish and Israel Studies at UC Berkeley. Rabbi Gilad Kariv is the President and CEO of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. And Dr. Moti Zeira is the founder and CEO of the Midrasha, the Educational Center for Jewish Life in Israel. And Sarah I know your name. Sarah Lipsey, the official title is the President of the Hani Foundation, will be moderating this panel. So.
Welcome everybody. I'm really glad to be here at C3 in Palo Alto. So I wanted to start today by echoing something that David Brooks said this morning, which was, we are in a community crisis in the US. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the American Jewish communities. Oh, hi. Now you can hear me. So as Americans, so I'm the only American on the panel. And so as Americans, we understand that to be part, we lower a little bit, to be part of a Jewish community, we need to join a synagogue, a Jewish school, a JCC. We need to actively join in. And usually in those institutions, we encounter a rabbi who is the leader of that institution, or sometimes just in the institution. And so American Jews have a lot of access to lots of different types of rabbis when they join in. In Israel, I don't have to tell my panel, but in Israel, outside of Orthodoxy, it's not so simple. The tent of Jewish options isn't filled. And there are few choices on how to express your Judaism in the Jewish state, which feels like an oxymoron to me. So we're going to discuss today the why that is happening and how each of my esteemed panel, people on the panel, how everybody is working to change the facts on the ground. So I want to talk for a minute about me and the Hani Foundation and what we're doing to try and change Israeli society. So our mission is to be a catalyst for the growth of open access to Jewish life in Israel. And by doing that, to enhance the connections between American Jews and Israeli Jews, which is why we're all here at this conference. We have seen a huge spike, and I'm sure everybody's going to talk about this, in Israel, in interest in Jewish life, an interest in finding meaning through Judaism. We, the Hani Foundation, work with rabbis and spiritual leaders to help grow authentic
and organic Israeli communities. We do this all across the country and also across the religious spectrum. The work we do, we try and professionalize the role of rabbi and spiritual leader. We provide salaries, professional development, and we help create a network of colleagues of the rabbis that we work with. And we know, and this is something we understand better in the American Jewish community, that rabbis are central to thriving Jewish communities. That the more time that a rabbi is able to spend in their community, or a leader is able to spend in their community, the more people they can touch, and the more time they're able to spend growing that community and proving to the Israeli public, this has value. Judaism has value. I am here seeing you, helping you and your family make meaning. So I want to bring it back to what I said at the beginning, that David Brooks said, we are in a crisis of community here in the US. I would argue that it's on both sides. It's both of our populations that are having community crises. And from our perspective, spiritual leaders and rabbis are part of that answer. So with that, I want to give each of our panel an opportunity to talk about what they are doing inside of Israeli Judaism. I'll ask at the beginning specifically about leadership, because you each are dealing with different types of leaders and different segments of Israeli Judaism. And then we'll have hopefully a conversation with all of you. And great. So Tomer, you want to start? We're sitting next to each other.
Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I will say a few words about the word crisis. I mean, I've just given a presentation about, you talked about community crisis. I will talk more about identity crisis. I think each of the major groups in Israel today, groups of Jewish public in Israel today, is going through an identity crisis that regards their Judaism, or the way they express and define for themselves their Judaism. So if you were talking about the growing interest, the engrossment of secular Jews in Israel in the Jewish tradition, I think that is a symptom of that crisis, meaning old paradigms, old frameworks of understanding of Jewish identity have fallen apart. I think both for the Jewish secular public, for the Jewish religious Zionist public, and for even ultra-Orthodox public. Old frameworks, old paradigms of understanding that Jewish identity have fallen apart, and new voices, new directions, new avenues of expression of Jewish identity are coming alive. So the Israeli secular interest in Jewish tradition, different parts of it, whether it is pluralistic Batei Midrash, learning Talmud, whether it is all sorts of spiritual quests, sort of New Age Judaism, Neo-Hasidism, Neo-Kabbalah, whether it is a Kabbalot Shabbat, Friday evenings in community with musical instruments, something that we didn't have in Israel really 20, 30 years ago. All these are expressions of the quest for a new, fashioning a new Jewish identity, this time for the seculars. Same is going on, or in different, of course, manifestations in the Zionist religious public, and even in the ultra-Orthodox public in Judaism. There is a quest, there is a search, there is a bubbling of activity, because the old frameworks don't hold anymore. Now, if I want to talk about what I'm doing, right now I'm in Berkeley, but when I was in Israel, I certainly tried to enhance the opportunities for mostly secular Jews to make contact with their tradition. And I think that is a key for directing the Israeli society in a positive direction, because the quest for a new Jewish identity is on, and if positive answers will not be supplied, will not be given for these people who are searching, they will go to the next best thing, the other alternative, which will be orthodox, sometimes ultra-nationalist and ethnocentric Judaism, which personally, of course, it's a matter of preference, but I don't want that to happen. And so I think it's a very important activity simply to be there and suggest access to others' forms of identity or contact with tradition. What I did, I will just say in a final word. For example, I officiated Jewish weddings. I conducted chuppahs in Israel, outside of the chief rabbinate, outside of the Orthodox establishment, for Jews who want to get married, even in an Orthodox way, and certainly if not, who want to get married but don't want any contact with the chief rabbinate. Also, a growing community and a pretty novel thing in Israel. So that's one example. Thank you.
So I'm Daniel Posen. Just to make it clear, I'm not Israeli. Not that that's meant to sound the way it just sounded, but we're a Swiss foundation, which, just to make it clear, we work now exclusively in Israel. I would say 20 odd years. Basically, the foundation's origins, or the genesis of why we got together as a family foundation, was the conundrum of what to do with the secular majority. Not that we had the answer for everybody, but clearly it is known throughout the world that the majority of Jews are basically non-religious. I don't often use the word non, but it simply comes out every now and again. But the fact of the matter is we are the majority. We never had a leader. We never had a canon. It just happened, and there are very good reasons why it has happened. And it's not a value judgment, it is a fact. The question is what to do with this fact, and it's really a problem. Because, and people often say to me, you know, are you not jealous or envious or angry at the religious? On the contrary, we are envious of the structures that they have created, and the fault is our own, and there's nobody else to blame. We spend our waking and often non-waking hours trying to figure out better ways to give options to secular Jews. And I use the word secular simply because wording is very problematic here. We call it cultural Jews. You can call it what you want. And just in a parenthesis, we worked many years in the States. We had a center in New York called Center for Cultural Judaism, which we ended up closing maybe 8 or 10 years ago because it was too hard to work in the States. Israel is a wonderful platform for secular Jews who understand what that means and want to be part of Jewish life. But they don't necessarily want to be called a flock or a sheep and want to be led. People want to do their own things. They want to learn their own way. And the key was to offer options which have not existed. Certainly, as a young person, I grew up in the Far East. I'm a classic example of the type of people we're trying to support, which we call JIJs, the Jewishly Impoverished Jew. And I'm a classic example of that person. And I think what we want to try to do, and what we do in Israel, is have a gamut of programs to stimulate others. There's examples of Nir Broide, who's here from Bina, which we're a big supporter of. We have on the panel, Moti, there are many groups that we work with that have different ways of expressing how Jews can be part and literally literate in their Jewishness without being part of either a synagogue or any other organized system. There's nothing wrong with those. It's a question of the options that don't exist for the majority of people who are like me and maybe some of you. So I would say that our main focus today is Israel. We do some things in other countries, but it's all around educating teachers to teach Jewish subjects in a more relevant way. I would also say that the origin of all this comes from, some of you will remember, and I know you'll know, and I think Moti, you remember the Shenhar report of 25, 91, which was Alisa Shenhar was Israel's ambassador to Russia at the time, or around the time, and they came basically to look at what ailed Israeli school system from all the secular subjects. And one of the most damning statement was the state of Jewish education in Israel. And I would just finish quickly by saying that people often, and I think you mentioned it actually, Sarah, in the beginning about the American community and the Jewishness here. I would say the problem is bigger in Israel than it is in the States, because here to be Jewish, you have to do something. In Israel, people think that because you speak a certain language and live a certain calendar, they are more Jewishly impoverished than their brothers and sisters, I feel, in the States or in any other diaspora country. So in fact, I think Israel is actually in worst case, and I think maybe Moti will be able to expound on that better than I, but I think Israel is the laboratory where we need to encourage Jews to be involved in their Jewishness, and not to tell them how, but to offer options for what is the majority of our people.
Moti's going to get excited. I just want to say that for the work that the Posen Foundation is doing, and Moti and Gilad and a lot of others, this word of options is so critical to this conversation. And as I said at the beginning, when I think about the tent of Jewish expression in Israel, the options are so limited. So this work that we're talking about, I think, is very timely. And so I'm excited to hear the second half of our panel. But I want us to think about this word of options as we listen.
Hi, my name is Moti Zeira. I'm the CEO of Hamidrasha. This is an organization that is now celebrating its 30 years. So we were one of the pioneers to understand the problematic things that we are talking here. And it came to me because of a very personal reason. I'm a very typical Eretz Israeli person. My grandparents made Aliyah from Russia in the early 20s. They were socialist, Zionist, secular, the whole package. My parents, and they had no problems with Jewish identity. They were sure they are the best Jews in the world. Because they made Aliyah and came to the land of Israel, they had all the Jewish tradition in their back mind. So they were really the best. My parents were born in the 30s. They are the typical Sabra, born in Israel. This is the generation that literally established the state. My father fought in the independence war. So they also didn't have any problems of identity. They were sure they are Israelis, that's enough. And the borders of community, which is something very important for us to speak here, the borders of the community it's a need of a human being to sense of belonging and sense of meaning. They, my parents' generation, got it from the fact that they were partners and builders of the Jewish state. So for them to say, I'm an Israeli, it was full of meaning, of spiritualism, and of course, the whole thing. I was born in the 50s. My formative experience is the Yom Kippur War, which is in Israeli terms, it's a whole collapsing of values. And the questions of who am I and why to pay so high price in order to live in Israel, it became the crucial question of my generation, because we have the options. Many of my friends came here. Many of my friends choose either to leave Israel, to stop being Zionist. It's Zionist 0-1, not Zionist 0.3. Or, which is also relevant to us, became Chozrim B'Tshuva, which are Orthodox. They were searching for something spiritual, and they couldn't find it in what you call the secular, environment in Israel. Something was missing, and I felt it back then, 30 or 35 years ago, and the options were very narrow. So I remember some of my Orthodox friends in the army told me, you're a seeker. Mm-hmm. Come to us. Have Shabbat with us, and you'll know exactly what to do, and this is it. And I felt intuitively that what he or they offered me was kind of conversion. because, and I couldn't accept it, because I felt intuitively back then that the narrative or the story of my family, which is the pioneers from the early beginning of the 20th century and the establishers of the state, this is part of the Jewish journey, this is part of the Jewish story. And if you say, okay, this friend told me, you did what you had to do. You have a saying in Hebrew, "Akushi asayid shelo, akushi yechu lalechet."
Don't translate.
Yeah, don't translate it.
No.
You finish your role, your historical role, okay, step out. And now, if you have to deal with eternity, with Jewish destiny, with all these big words, come to us. And this is something that I couldn't get. So we had, I think all of us are part of a generation that decided that we don't give up the opportunity to be part of the Jewish story. And in Israel, back then, and even today, it's either or. Right? Either secular, it means you don't want to deal at all with Judaism, or Jewish, which means Dati, which means only Orthodox. And I'm so ashamed to say that I got my PhD from the Haifa University in Jewish history. I was 35. I didn't even know that there are other movements in the Jewish world. I didn't know anything about the Reform movement, conservative movement. I didn't know a thing because I was a very typical Israeli, which we knew that there are only seculars or Orthodox. That's it. It's not right. Mm-hmm. So our commitment back then, until this very moment, is to enable every Jew in Israel who wants it to feel at home in his or her Jewish tradition in a way that will be relevant, open-minded, pluralistic, of course, and so on. And when we started it, it was very, crazy. These crazy people. If you want to deal with Judaism, okay, once or twice in your lifetime, you have to get married or get buried. Okay, let's do it as a swallow a pill, and that's it. It won't hurt you. And we said that it has to be much more. And then it was the first step of the whole journey that we're still in this path of searching of Jewish meaning to our life in Israel, because we feel, and I feel personally, that if you won't find it, so we're in a crucial, fundamental moment of crisis. Because when you say Jewish democratic state, and most of my friends from the Czech Republic are committed emotionally to the democratic side of it, but when they have to move inconvenient in the chairs because Jewish is not, they don't understand it, don't feel it's theirs. So this is something that we have to take care of. So we started with a lot of support for all of this panel. It's the Mishpuche, and we really struggled together for many ways to enable many exercises for Israelis to do it through open learning and gender and Judaism and all these kind of exerciise. And I want to emphasize one, and this is the fact that in Israel, for many years, because of historical reasons, there was no vivid and vibrant term of community, sense of community. For my parents, the borders of Israel was the community. By defining themselves as Israelis, they felt what they are part of. For my generation, my children's generation, the sense of community is missing. But they need it because of, the modern world, this atomization and feeling lonely in the world. You need some intimate framework in order to express your life. So here is the chance for us as Jews, as seekers, that want to take the Jewishness seriously. This is the moment where we can use all the experience, the knowledge, the richness that we have in Judaism in order to bring it to people that don't really know or feel that this can be part of the discussion, part of the solution for their life. So 20 years ago, we decided in Midrashah, we felt it has to do something, I think, with our kibbutznik background. I'm a kibbutz member, and some of the founders of Midrashah came from the kibbutz movement. the sense that this vague sense that if you are together, it's better than to be lonely. Simple as that. So we were struggling for finding a meaning for what does it mean a Jewish community in Israel, emerging Jewish Israeli communities in Israel. How to live Jewish life? You can't live Jewish life just by learning once in other week or something. You have to get more expressions for that. And the way to do it is to establish or to help Israelis to arrange or to build frameworks of community. That it will not be through, basically it won't be through the existing religious movements in Israel. Some of them will do it and choose the Reform movement and the Conservative movement. These are our best friends for struggling for better Israel. Most of them will reject everything, but they were looking for some framework. So it can be group of families, or the community centers in Israel, or even school teachers, parents in school that are seeking for Kabbalat Shabbat that will have meaning. So we took upon ourselves the mission to train spiritual leaders for these kind of emerging communities in Israel that will be relevant for the Israeli arena. So I can tell a little bit about that later, but this is our mission today.
So Rabbi Kariv, Gilad Kariv is going to talk to us about the Reform movement and this issue of leadership and community building. In 1 second, I wanted just to respond to what Moti said, because some of the work, all of the work that we have done in the last few years together with our partners has shown us that as more and more Israelis are touched and the numbers are growing, there begins to be a groundswell of this need of more and more people are saying, I'm looking for meaning. And then the next question is, well, my government, my country is not responding to me and to who I am. And so the more communities that we can support, the more leaders in communities that we can support, there, in my opinion, will be a groundswell of there has to be change in this country. And so Gilad has a lot of experience in that issue. So I wanted to say
thank you, Sarah. And also thank you for not choosing the halachic rule of Hanukkah that you start with the left candle. So I'm glad that you're going the other way. And thank you for all you're doing through the Ani Foundation in Israel. And I'll try to continue because to continue with the line that was presented by my colleagues to this panel. But I'll start by saying that in a way, Hebrew once again is more sophisticated than English when we're talking about crises. Because in Hebrew, the word for a crisis is mashber. This is the word which is used in modern Hebrew to deal with crises. But in biblical Hebrew, the same word is used in order to present the chair that was used by a pregnant woman in the process of delivery. And it's a crisis and a new beginning in Hebrew at the same time. This last Shabbat we read Parashat Miketz, and we are reading about Yaakov that sent his children lishbor shever. It's the same root of mashber, and lishbor shever is to bring food to the family. And I'm saying it because I want to challenge the opening statement. I'm not so sure that we are facing a crisis. We are facing a challenging moment. We are facing an exciting moment. We definitely are not allowed to ignore the need to renew the way we think about our Jewish identity, the way we practice our Jewish identity. We need to reimagine the organizations that are helping us to manifest our Jewish identity, but we need to be a little bit more careful with our ordinary and daily use of the word crisis. I don't think that we have an identity crisis in Israel. I think that we are being challenged by serious issues in regard to our Jewish-Israeli identity. I don't see myself as an expert for North American Jewish life, and I know that there is a very strong discourse today in North American Jewish community about the crisis and the crisis of continuity and the crisis of the organized movements. I don't think we are experiencing a crisis also here. We are being challenged by the reality in America. I don't think we have a crisis in Israel. I don't think we have a crisis in North America. We need to do what Jews did many times in our ancient history, but also in our modern history. Moti already reminded us about the crisis of the Yom Kippur War. He also a great scholar of the second Aliyah and the third Aliyah, and he can tell you all about the crisis of the second Aliyah and the crisis of the third Aliyah. And there was a crisis of the first Aliyah too, right? And Reform Judaism was built 200 years ago because of a crisis, and the Hasidic movement was established because of a crisis. Let's be careful, okay? Because we are paying a price for this inner feeling that we are facing a major crisis. Yes, it can motivate the leadership to reimagine the way we do things. But in the end, most people don't like to join operations in crisis. More than that, and here I refer to some political comments that were already suggested, there are forces today in the Jewish world, and especially in Israel, and they have a very strong hold in the Israeli political leadership, that are using this discourse of crisis, especially among the secular, the progressive community, in order to suggest that we are not a leading force in the Jewish people, we are less relevant to the future of the Jewish people. And we need to be very careful in the way we communicate the fact that, yes, we need to rethink our way, and it's not a surprise. We are progressive people, we are people that believe in the need to change, to reimagine, to reinvent. It's part of the way we understand Judaism. After this long introduction, I will not repeat the analysis of my three colleagues. I basically agree with this analysis. I think that in the end, we present not similar responses, but we are coming from the same family. And I want to continue with what Moti said. Usually when we're talking about a Jewish Renaissance or a pluralistic Jewish Renaissance, both in Israel and in diaspora communities in North America and other parts of the world, we tend to talk about Jewish knowledge, Jewish text, Jewish practices. But Moti, I think, was extremely accurate when he focused on the concept of community building. In the end, it's not only a question of the content that we are using. It's mainly the question of accessibility. It's the question of how we ensure the ability of our audiences in Israel and outside Israel to touch, to be inspired by, to experience the knowledge, the values, the practices that we all know and we all identify as the goods of our Jewish tradition. And here we need to be very clear. Unless in the coming 1 or 2 decades, we create a new reality in Israel, that small p progressive Judaism, that egalitarian Judaism, that progressive, I always say, inclusive Judaism, is accessible around the corner of the Israelis, our revolution, which is a very successful revolution today in Israel, will not be sustainable. And the same way Jews in Palo Alto want their inclusive, egalitarian, inspiring Judaism around the corner. They don't want to take the car and to drive to the city in order to enjoy a Jewish moment. The people in Be'er Sheva do not want to take the car and to drive to Beit Daniel, our successful congregation in Tel Aviv. And the people of Gdera don't want on Shabbat evening to drive to Rehovot. And we need to make sure that in 180 Israeli Hebrew-speaking municipalities, in each one of them, there will be at least one well-established, successful, sustainable, egalitarian, inclusive, small p progressive operation. Now, I don't care in the end if it's a secular community, if it's a reform community, a conservative community, or unaffiliated community. In the end, there are no big differences. The vast majority of Israeli seculars, according to all surveys, are interested in spiritual Jewish moments. All those are the, in the end, you're saying an Israeli secular, but the pattern of life includes many spiritual moments. I'm not calling them religious moments. At the same way, many people that will identify themselves as religious Jews or spiritual Jews are deeply interested in Judaism from a cultural perspective. And there is a reason why secular organizations today are building communities. You don't want to call it synagogue, fine with me. But in the end, for 2,000 years of Jewish tradition, when you build a Jewish community, the name was synagogue. You don't need to continue to use it. But the concept is the same concept. And when secular organizations are training rabbis, and sometimes they call them rabbis, sometimes they call them spiritual leaders, everything is okay. Those are fractions of a much bigger picture that we need to be committed to. We need to create a communal infrastructure and the right leadership to lead those local entities. We need to cultivate local lay leadership because that's the only way to secure sustainability. You cannot run the operation from Jerusalem or from Seminar Ifal. We need to make sure that there are thousands of Israelis that are willing to be local lay leaders of this Jewish Renaissance movement. We are all doing that. And the last sentence is that when you look carefully into the Israeli reality, and I fully agree with Moti, there are very dangerous developments today in Israel in regard to human rights, to the democratic values of Israel. It has to do with the way we understand Judaism. But we need to leave this room with an optimistic sense that in less than 15 years, we succeeded to create a situation, a new situation in Israel, that for the vast majority of Israelis, this dichotomy between orthodoxy and strict atheism or secularism, which is not deeply connected and rooted in Jewish values and discourse, this dichotomy, we succeeded to break it. And we need to celebrate this major achievement.
Thank you for ending with optimism, because we are about to light the Chanukiah, the 8th candle, in a few minutes altogether in the last plenary. And to me, the core message of Hanukkah is the Jews survive. The Jews survive. And this, you're right, Gilad, this is a challenging moment. It is a challenging moment for Jews in America, for people in America. It is a challenging moment in Israel. And that optimism, which I believe is the Jewish people, the Jewish people are a people of hope, is what gives me the energy every day to do this work. So thank you for reminding me of that. So I'm going to ask the first question, and then we're going to open up. And I hope we can have like a conversation. There's not so many of us in the room, so call out if you have something to say. So we are all here to talk about, right, the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews and this fracture. And this is a conversation going on around the world. And I'll say I'm actually sensitive. Daniel's here. It's not just about American Jews, it's about the diaspora, about all of us, world Jewry and Israeli Jewry. My question that I was thinking about all morning that I want to ask all of you is, how do you think spiritual leaders can help heal us? Heal us as a people?
Do you want to collect more questions? Because in the last session we didn't have the time. So you want to collect and then we'll...
I'm curious about a group in Israeli society, and these are Russian immigrants who came and were accepted because they had a relative who was Jewish, but they're recognized as Israelis, but they're not recognized as Jews. What do you do with these people? How do you assimilate them into Israeli society?
Why don't we take one more question and then we'll try and answer.
Well, really, the deepest biblical verse expressed in the American Revolutionary era, at least in English, is translated, "And they, every man, shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and none shall make him afraid." So we have such a deep, rich, prophetic tradition. Now, when I say Hebrew prayer, it's going to be different than Israeli, because your language is Greek, and so when I say a prayer in Hebrew, I'm trying to learn more of the root meanings. But Adon Olam is going to, when I say the prayer, it's going to have a certain mystical quality almost to me. It may seem different to you. You are native speaker. You have all these connections, and understanding the roots is all important in Hebrew. So how do you deepen the experience for Israelis that way, through a deeper knowledge of the language? And what perhaps might you suggest to American Jews who want to learn more about the meaning of prayer?
Why don't we answer that, Russian, and then my question at the end? Okay? So let's talk for a minute. Maybe Moti can start about Hebrew language. That's up your alley.
Listen, the Hebrew language is something. This is our moledet. This is our homeland for Hebrew speakers. First of all, let's remember that my grandparents, when they came, they didn't have this Hebrew as a Mamelution, and they had to go through a whole process of adopting the Hebrew. And I think that for today, the Hebrew is one of the for Israelis. Hebrew, the language, is one of the things when I'm looking for hope. So the Hebrew is the hope. Why? Because people are talking, communicating, don't really know the roots. Just Gilad gave us a great demonstration of that, of the mashber, shever, and so on. And by exposing them to the roots of the language, you are doing something very, very profound in order to build the Jewish identity. I had the privilege to write the biography of Naomi Shemer, who wrote Yerushalayim Shel Zahav and Jerusalem of Gold. And I was struck by the fact that in every song that every Israeli knows since kindergarten, you can find the roots, the mekorot, the quotations from Bible and from Mishnah and Hasidic stories and so on. So from the educational point of view, if you have something, you are not aware to what is the richness that you have in it, but you can go through a process of explore it, discover it. So this is something that built your identity because it's yours already, but now you are rediscovering it. So for Hebrew speakers, the Hebrew language is something that we work very hard with it in Israel, and this is something that we can find out can make a change, because you don't have to go, as I was offered by my friend, Orthodox friend, come to us, make a conversion, become Jew. No, you have it already, and then you can work with it and make it even more profound as usual.
I want to answer the question about the Russian immigrants, the immigrants from Russia, which are not halachically Jewish. It's actually a very interesting situation, because there are about 300,000 to 400,000 of them. They are in a status of non-religion, no religion, as if they don't exist religiously. But because they identify as Israeli, and because they serve in the army, most Israelis who are not Orthodox will accept them as Israelis and as Jews. So they will have no real problem marrying them, certainly befriending them, etc. So what we have today is a process in which Israel itself has its, from Orthodox eyes, problem of intermarriage, right? And some Orthodox rabbis are scrambling to try to convert them en masse in order for them to be Jews, so then there won't be any problem. But that doesn't, of course, work. So it's right now it's a problem that is still not really identified by most. It's a situation that's not identified in its full potential by most Israelis, and its potential is to change or to help change the religious state's relations in Israel. Because when that public is 1 million, let's say, 1 million people who cannot get married in Israel because they're not Jewish, right? They're buried sometimes not in the same way because they're not Jewish. When that mass of people really gains enough consciousness of its own state and political power and agitation, it will explode and help really, I believe, topple the Orthodox establishment, religious establishment in Israel.
First of all, about Hebrew, sometimes it's better not to understand the words of your prayers, especially to progressive people, modern and postmodern. No, sometimes, it's nice, you don't really understand all the meanings. But I think you're identifying correctly that one of the great miracles of Jewish history in the 20th century is the revival of Hebrew. And here I strongly believe that there is a challenge and a potential for diaspora communities. And when you compare, I'm coming from the Reform movement, when you compare the new Siddur, which is used by most of our congregations here, and the Siddur that was used 20 years ago, you see a growing desire to give Hebrew a leading role in our spiritual life here. And I fully believe that if we have today 2,000 non-Orthodox communities, affiliated and not affiliated, in North America, each one of them should become a center for Hebrew studies. And that the Hebrew language should be the base of our future relations, and also a very strong pillar of securing Jewish continuity outside Israel. About the Russian community, I of course agree with Tomer about what he said. I just want to add one point. When the first waves of the Russian-speaking immigration came to Israel, we all had this false idea that with 1 million Jews that were raised in an extreme secular environment in the former Soviet Union, this will be the moment for the non-Orthodox movements and organizations to create a revolution. What we discovered, and again, today it's something that we don't understand how come we missed it, that always the first generation of immigrants don't have the inner energy to deal with issues of identity. They are resetting their life. And what we see, that after almost 20 years of lack of interest among the vast majority of the newcomers from Russia, we need to say it, and it's the same case here. You have the same phenomena in Canada and in the States. We see that among the younger generation, what is called in Israel Generation 1.5, there is a new opportunity. There is a growing awareness to issues of identity, and we need to re-embrace this task. Here I'm talking on behalf of all of the organizations in this field of Jewish Renaissance in Israel. We need to cultivate a new effort vis-a-vis those audiences. I can tell you that 3 out of the 25 new congregations we established in Israel in the last 7 years were built by young Russian-speaking Israelis. Last sentence about spiritual leadership. Here I do think you are touching a crisis. Why? Because for centuries it was clear that Jews know how to cultivate political leadership, communal leadership, financial leadership, and also spiritual leadership. And it was a given fact, in spite of all the theological differences, each Jewish denomination, community, way of thinking had its spiritual leadership. One of the challenges we have today in Israel is that after the founding generation of secular Zionism in Israel with its great spiritual leader, Ade Gordon was a spiritual leader. Beryl Katzenelson was a political leader, but also a spiritual leader. Brenner was a spiritual leader. Something happened in our non-Orthodox Israeli community or communities that led us not to invest in creating spiritual leaders. And we will not be able to secure the success of the revolution that we really feel that is around the corner unless we invest more and more efforts in cultivating those spiritual, educational, cultural leaders.
And I want to add to that this is something that Amisha is very focused, and you support us in that. I think you are right. I think that the question now is not about the thirst for or the seeking for Jewish life, but who are going to be the leaders of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if in every school the offer is the Hasidic, the Chabadnik rabbi will enter for free and offer what they have to offer, and the Posen Foundation fight for that. We need to take care, this is our responsibility, to take care that the leadership will be at least in the level of responsibility, of knowledge, of wisdom, to lead. Because today, to lead spiritually, it's very complex task. And because who cares? And it's not about orthodoxy, it's not about reform or secular whatever. In the modern world, to stand and to say to your peer groups, hey, I'm a leader. Not listen to me, but let's communicate. Let's maintain some kind of discourse or dialogue where we can talk about it, and you will be open to hear. This is something in the modern world, and especially in Israel and with all its tenses, it's very, very complicated. You need to train leaders to that. So we have programs to that. We have it in Amidrasha together with the Hartman Institute. We have in the HUC and other programs. We are committed to do that because these are the people that can lead it to the next stage.
So I obviously agree with what Moti just said, and that to me, it's even more critical and I want to get to my question about healing. It's even more critical that we think about how to support these leaders in Israel, because the work we do and everybody on this panel does is nothing to do with the government. Mm-hmm. But the reality on the ground is that 99% of the government funds allocated to religion is going to a tiny fraction of society. So how can we build a culture of spiritual leaders outside of ultra-Orthodoxy if the state is supporting this tiny piece. So I as we are going to wrap up in the next few minutes, it's a challenge for us as the American Jewish community. It's a place I feel we can truly have partnership. And so I want to ask, I'm going to say my question again, and I really, Daniel, you're going to go first because we haven't heard from you in a little bit, but how can spiritual leaders and spiritual teachers help us heal, help our the diaspora community and the Israeli community heal?
Well, I think I would probably reply a little bit more towards the issue of, first of all, we do work with the Israeli Ministry of Education. And you must work with them, and I think all of you do some work with them, simply because the professionals that are there are always there. These are people who keep their jobs. Of course, at the higher level, you have all kinds of nuts that have been in and out of the ministry, and some better than others. There haven't been many ones lately. But I think I would just focus on the issue of what we're going to do about this in Israel. I mean, I think we always lament the issue of we don't get any traction because at the end of the day we cannot be a foundation or any of us substitute what the government can do at schools, and it's extremely frustrating. I mean, many years ago we took the Ministry of Education to court at the Supreme Court. Very small case. We won it. It was won because the money was separated in a very undemocratic and certainly not per capita way. But until the government and the ministries make a decision in this area, we're progressing well. I mean, I think all of us are doing well compared to where we were. The issue is going to be to do things that are attractive. We don't spend a lot of time in so-called futurology. I know that's not a real English word, but we don't spend time in guessing what's going to happen. The most important way to work is the here and now. It is that if students, teachers, and others in the informal sector show that students are voting with their feet, I don't see how else you're going to really do it. Now, of course, academics will have their idea, and reform movement, I'm sure, have their suggestions. But from a practical business standpoint, which is the only way I know how to work, is to do things. I'm often very tired of, not this is great, but there are panels where people imagine what's going to happen to who cares. It doesn't help. What helps is, can you educate the Jewishly impoverished Jew today in ways that are attractive enough so that you will eventually get the attention of people in government, because at the end of the day, they're the only ones that will have the money to be able to disperse this in a correct way. But as long as you have coalition governments, and I'm not an Israel expert at all, but it's going to be very hard because you have exactly what you just said, and you co-opt most of the money in one or two different directions. But I think the only way is to be attractive and let the students and others vote with their feet, because that will show that these things are working and they're attractive.
I would say that part of the way to struggle with what you said about healing is to create groups, peer groups of spiritual leaders in Israel and Jews outside of Israel. And because spiritual leader, whatever, whether it's called rabbi or spiritual leader, whatever, or community leader, it's a very lonely position. People feel lonely. And you need to create some support group for them that will be able to share their experience and their frustrations. And I think that, and I know it from our group, our people, that the moment you find out that you have a peer group, you can be on the other side of the ocean or the other side of the street, but you feel less lonely and you get some battery in order to continue in what you do. And this battery, it's based on relationships, on learning together, on listening, and this is something that we spiritual leaders have to learn, is that listening is as important as knowing and saying, and lecturing. So how to learn it? You need this framework of support, and I think that what we do by gathering together rabbis from different Jewish backgrounds and allowing them to sit and to talk, this is one of the ways to start with that.
I understand your question in regard to the role of spiritual leader of rabbis. I'm fully comfortable with the title rabbi, so I will use the title rabbi.
It's called talking your own book.
Yes. Look, I need to say, and again, I think that we belong to the same family. I grew up in an extremely secular family in Israel, which is still a secular family, but in a very early stage.
They tolerate you?
I tolerate them. What do you mean? No, they tolerate me, yes. But in a very early stage in my life, I understood that if I'm serious in my Jewish journey, and I think there is a lot of knowledge there, why I need to invent new titles for a work that was done by Jewish spiritual leaders in the last 2,000 years? Jewish spiritual leaders are called rabbis. They can be, from my perspective, secular rabbis and progressive rabbis and reform rabbis. A spiritual leader in the Jewish context is, I always felt very comfortable with using the word title, the title rabbi, and I of course respect others that feel differently. Look, in the end, especially in Israel, religion is deeply connected with politics. And sometimes when you are occupied with the struggle, and we in the Reform movement, for us the struggle is daily, together with our friends in the conservative movement. Every time you open the newspaper in Israel, you can find something about the struggles, the political and legal struggles of the movement. And you need to be very careful not to forget that in the end, it's not about the political struggles. It's about the personal encounter. And you're asking us about the role of rabbis or spiritual leaders in healing the Israeli reality. The only way to do it is to make sure that the vast majority of non-Orthodox Israelis are in a situation that they are telling themselves, we have a spiritual, cultural, moral, educational source of inspiration. And it's all about the numbers of people we are sending out there to the Israeli fields. It's all about the number of people we are training. It's all about the number of Israelis that meet a reform, a conservative, a secular rabbi or spiritual leader in action. You need to know that today, according to the different surveys, more than or almost 60% of all secular Israelis say that they saw a reform or a conservative rabbi in action in the last 2 years, leading a wedding or a bar mitzvah service or a high holiday service. And again, I think that secular spiritual leaders are included in this. That's the way to heal the Israeli, the attitude of Israelis to Judaism, and the ability to build a much more inclusive and pluralistic society.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to say there's two things that I hope you're going to leave thinking about. And one is, how do we fill this tent of Israeli Judaism with more options? Right? All of the people here are working hard every day to do that. And what role do we as American Jews play in helping to fill that tent? So that's the first. And the second is about spiritual leaders and spiritual teachers. And again, the question is, how can we as American Jews connect to our brothers and sisters in Israel? Because I'm in Israel 4 or 5 times a year. So people all the time are asking me, what should I see? What should I do? What's the best thing to do when I'm in Israel? And my answer to them is always, I'll pick a coffee shop for you in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, and you tell me you're going to sit there for a whole day, and I'm going to send you somebody every hour. And that's how you get to know Israel. That's how you fall in love with Israel.
It depends on what coffee shop.
Okay. I'm going to pick a good one. Moti, I'm going to pick a good one.
That's the kibbutznik, you see.
So
Identity crisis.
I always...
The new ones in Tel Aviv, you can't go in sandals.
Yes.
That's why he's pissed off.
So I always tell people that the rocks are going to be there next time. But the people are what connect us, what, in my opinion, are going to heal this gap. And so it's leaders and it's the people. So I hope that you leave this session thinking about those two things. And thank you to our panel.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
enjoy the
Thank you.
plenary.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.